You ever randomly make an impulse game purchase not really knowing what you're gonna get? I'll get more into this when I look at Manhunt 2, but after I talked about Manhunt in 2022, it stuck with me way more than I expected it to. And ever since, I've been on my own hunt to find something that captures the same feel. Obviously, I immediately turned to indie games because big companies just ain't willing to make horrific Murder Simulator 2025 like they used to. I found a lot of good candidates that maybe I'll talk about some other day, like Pigface, Aloga Games by Puppet Combo, and most notably Cry of Fear, which I definitely have on my docket after loads of suggestions for it on my Manhunt video. But the one I settled on is the subject of today, Butcher's Creek. Butcher's Creek was headed by David Zemansky, who you might know for a couple things. I don't think that's him. He did Gloomwood, Squirrel Stapler, Chop Goblins, and most notably Dusk and Iron Lung. Both games I've really got to get around to finishing, because man do I love me some Dusk. I don't think I've seen anyone really talking about this game. I just saw the gritty and gruesome aesthetic, saw some good old-fashioned first-person combat, and then realized it was only like $10 and said sure, why not, without looking much further than that. Besides, how could I resist such critical reviews as actually sharded 3 times and you kill man with a shovel? It's also worth noting that allegedly, according to the Steam page, this is in the same world as Squirrel Stapler and the Pony Factory. The game I imagine has some fun stuff that probably ties into those, but I've never played either, and I think the game can stand on its own good enough that I don't really feel like I have to. So if I end up glossing over some sort of connective tissue that you think is really cool, my bad. Don't worry, I'll play them eventually. While prepping for this video, I was surprised to find that there's not that much out there about this game, which is probably why I knew next to nothing going into it. I decided to rummage around for any supplementary information after I'd beaten the game, and honestly I still didn't find much aside from the fact that the creator honed in on this dreamlike horror to really focusing on the living nightmare vibe of the game's scenario, which as I'll delve into later, I think they very much succeeded in doing. And that aside from being inspired by the obvious, it was also very influenced by Condemned: Criminal Origins, a game I had also never heard of. But after looking into it more, I'll definitely have to keep it on my radar. Seems like it could be interesting. Other than that, there's really not that much to dig into besides the game itself. So with that being said, you are some guy, and you've traveled to the poster boy for bumfuck nowhere, Butcher's Creek. See, this dude loves snuff, like, so much, and we're at the place where a bunch of grade-A serial killers film the primo content. So this is one of those self-guided backstage tour kind of deals. We quickly find a hammer and make it our mission to claw through this place for a chance that there might be some director's cuts lying around. After some walking and destruction of property, we find a hatch going to this basement area where our character is way more surprised at the presence of human bones than they should be, given they came here to see murder. We even get to participate in the fun, as eventually we find one of the executioners in the tunnels and get to slap him around. Who needs snuff films when I could just do it myself? It's not like anybody's gonna miss these guys anyhow. There's some more wandering after that. You'd think if these guys like killing so much, they'd be more willing to show it off. Oh, finally, something good. Ow. In a semi-deserved turn of events, we're now taking prisoner and are next in line to be put on VHS. Shame these guys aren't dumb as bricks and left an easy method of escape for me. So now we've got to fight our way out of this hellhole and accidentally stumble our way into a prophecy and sacrificial cult, but that's, we'll get there. So if we've got to fight our way out, how exactly do we do that? Well, despite being the main focus of the game, the combat here is surprisingly simple. You've got 2 buttons, a swing and a parry, and that's pretty much all there is to it. Smack them up when you've got an opening, when they feel like swinging, wait for the right time and block. It's made a bit more reactionary. Every enemy has a light, medium, and heavy attack, each with different animations and timings. You'd think the light version would be the hardest to deal with because it's fast and so you barely have time to react, but no, I actually had the most trouble with the heavy swing. Since the lights and mediums are generally fast, whenever they ready a swing, I block fast, but these take so long to come out that even when I'm ready for it, I'm still too early. And since these do the most damage out of all their attacks, that means I'm eating shit. There's like 4 different types of enemies. Here at the start of the game, it's mainly these guys with the bags over their heads that look like they're going as scarecrows for Halloween. But it doesn't really matter, aside from the blue guys with the welding masks that I think take more hits. All the enemies here work the same. They carry different classes of weapons. Usually the bag head guys have the worst weapons, while the welding mask dudes have the best, with the camo and yellow enemies falling somewhere in the middle, but other than that, they all come after you the same, they all attack the same. They don't even have different attacking animations. This wouldn't be that big of a deal if the basic act of combat was a problem. Maybe maybe like a classic Silent Hill where you could be so out of health or resources that dealing with enemies becomes such a problem that it's better to run away, even if that means you'll have to deal with them later, but no, not really. There's always a weapon lying around for you to work with, and even if there's not, you'll usually find a pipe you can break off a wall and subsequently break someone's face with. Sometimes there's even shovels and axes lying around that have increased range, and the axes in particular straight up annihilate people. But yeah, you're always more than capable of beating up people if need be. I guess if you really are looking for some variety, you can pick up objects in the environment and keep chucking them at people until they give up, which feels like giving the most and least effort possible.
It's no use!
The only thing that shakes up the combat are the, let's just call them OSHA violations. There aren't that many of these, it's usually pits and the occasional spinning saw, but if you don't feel like whacking enemies until they stop moving, you can use these for an instant kill. This also works because of your mighty kick. Apart from probably making some fetishists out there happy, because yeah, I forgot to mention after you get kidnapped you're naked for the entire rest of this, it also does a great job of schoolyard bullying these executioners. It can throw them off balance, getting them off view for a second, but it's usually better to let them do their thing so you can parry their attacks. It's mainly good for shoving them into the hazards around, which by the time I got to the final area of the game where there were a lot more pits, I opted to almost exclusively kick them to their death. This was for multiple reasons. First, it made things a bit more interesting. I had to manage both my and the enemy's positions, making sure I wasn't going to get bonked and that they were lined up to fall without falling myself. And second, I was starting to get a little fatigued of the walk up, bait swing, parry, attack, and repeat flowchart, so it was nice to mix things up slightly. I'm not going to hold me getting tired of the combat against the game, because to be fair, by the time I got to that point there were at most like 30 minutes of game left, but still. I think it illustrates that gameplay-wise, yeah, there ain't that much to Butcher's Creek. It's a very simple game. What you're doing by minute 10 is what you'll be doing by minute 90. So then why did I enjoy this game so much? Butcher's Creek excels in its aesthetic and atmosphere above everything else. I was genuinely on edge for a good portion of this game, and that's entirely due to the game's environments. I think this is also amplified by the actual presentation itself. At first glance, it most replicates PS1 games, but honestly, take a still frame from any point, and it kinda reminds me of an old point-and-click game. The images on the Steam page especially give me that vibe. Feels like I should be searching around for clues or something. This is a bit of a side tangent, but this game got me thinking on how I generally feel like games that either have or emulate older graphics are scarier than the big AAA horror games that do realism and all that. Obviously, this is a subjective thing, and honestly, it's something that's hard to describe because it's kind of an all-encompassing thing that could be discussed about a lot of older games, with that even extending to games that aren't horror-related. I can't explain to you why Baby Hyper got nervous whenever Cortex started talking to you in Crash 3, but I can at least explain why it works good in Butcher's Creek to hopefully give things some more context. First, this game is great at theming. It literally follows you around the whole time with this film grain filter, and the HUD maintains that VHS look. Though I wish there was a way to turn it off, because it adds to the found footage feel that I think emphasizes the oppressive vibe of the game, even if it means I wouldn't be able to see my health or weapon durability. What you can turn off, though, is the film grain filter, and man, does that really hurt the general look of things. Everything's way too clean now, and it extremely detracts from basically every environment in the game. I get if you want to turn it off because it's strains your eyes or something similar, but if you have the option, please don't. Because you can't tell me this gets the vibe across as good as this. With settings at default, though, it's good at feeling like I came here for snuff, now I do a snuff, and overall, Butcher's Creek does a great job of maintaining that idea the whole way through. The story does take a turn involving it, which I'll circle back around to in a minute here, but either way, I like that it follows you through your methods of healing and saving your game. First, for healing, you've got a camera by your side during this whole journey, and this is your method of rejuvenating yourself. Apparently, this guy loves gore so much that simply taking pictures of blood, body parts, and other crime scene memorabilia heals you by varying amounts. Sometimes you'll end up finding a large blood splatter or something in the corner of a room, and you'll have to keep it in mind so you know where to run back to if a fight goes poorly. I like that you have to consider your surroundings and remember where it is, because if there's a lot of gore, that's a lot of health that you might not necessarily need at the moment, so you'll have to keep trucking until a more opportune time arises. Initially, I was also disappointed because I took a picture of a guy I beat to death and got no health out of it and was like, come on, have some pride in your work. But then I realized it only heals you if you spill some blood on the environment itself, so that's another potentially interesting combat feature to consider. Luring enemies to walls so you can spray some blood on it if you're that desperate for health. I don't think it gets that bad. In fact, you can sometimes find photos of snuff that'll heal you a lot, which confuses me because surely a picture isn't as titillating as standing right next to it. But either way, it should keep you topped off enough that you won't be scrounging around for it. As for saving, in the environment you can find some homemade snuff films lying around and each tape allows you to save. Think of the ink ribbons from Resident Evil. You can't be saving all willy-nilly because you might not have enough tapes left to save when you need it. And since you need to be a bit conservative in when you use them, it adds some tension in combat encounters knowing that you might have to replay some of them if you die. That being said, it's not like you'll be in super desperate need for tapes. I used one anytime I found a new save spot and even used some more than once if I'd worked through a lot of fights between saves, and I still had a decent amount sitting there just in case. The only other thing you can do with tapes is use them to unlock doors, which is where I imagine that surplus would be going towards, since these can require as many as 3 tapes out of you. They usually have the better weapons in the game, either a gore spud or a Polaroid, and sometimes a page that gives you lore stuff. But considering I was usually fine using whatever weapons were lying around and I made do with the health I had, I didn't end up using these. The only real draw of them for me was the extra lore stuff, but I could find enough time piecing together the story from what I could find outside the rooms, and some of them didn't even have pages in them, so I completely dropped using these rooms by the halfway point. I imagine the decision making would be a lot better on a harder difficulty, because then you have the dilemma of, do I use my tapes to save and make sure I can keep making forward progress, or do I use them for safe rooms so that making forward progress can be easier even if I know a death will undo all of that. For me though, I played on the game's normal difficulty and I died like a handful of times, but nothing too bad, so I never felt the need. The point being, I really like the integration of these game mechanics because of how they add to the atmosphere, and I feel like they're the perfect microcosm of how I feel about Butcher's Creek. From a gameplay perspective, they work well enough, even if there's some hang-ups, but in terms of improving and getting you immersed in the experience, they work extremely well. And to uncover the best parts of said experience, we've got to talk about the fear factor of this game, because I'm not embarrassed to admit, this game was pretty scary for me in a pretty interesting way. So the enemies aren't scary, man. They walk at you with all the urgency of someone on their way to grab something off the grocery store shelf and only have the energy to take swings at you and shout expletives almost as much as I do. But the presentation can, occasionally, make them slightly more intimidating. Funnily enough, the times where they most freaked me out was before their AI realized I was a person, so they just stand completely unmoving in the pitch black darkness, and suddenly I felt like I was losing the world's most intense stare down. There were 2 distinct times the enemies got a jump out of me, and that's because when you see an enemy for the first time, they aren't really introduced. You walk into a room and there's a new guy there you weren't expecting, which I think works in its favor, particularly opening a door and seeing a bunch of weird things with God knows what on their heads was a pretty good scare. The crunchy visuals and extremely dark areas also helps make enemies harder to immediately distinguish. Like when I first saw the camo guys, I didn't know what to make of them and saw the holes in their mask as completely black eyes. Seeing as the enemies all work the same, the shock factor that comes from seeing a new character you weren't expecting is the most these guys have going. So it's nice the aesthetic helps to elevate that. Speaking of which, yeah, this game is really dark. All Butcher's Creek gives you to work with is the world's lowest power flashlight, so anything that isn't directly in front of you is just the color black. This also extends to the shadows as well, which adds to the game's striking visual style and helps keep you on edge when a majority of what you're seeing is negative space. The environments themselves also have this distinct level of grime to them. With the exception of the strip club, for the most part anyway, every building here is rusted, dilapidated, decaying, and the stark shadows only add to the tension. It makes it feel like the rooms you exist in themselves are against you. Just walking around is uncomfortable and tense. Even the more lit up areas still don't feel good to be in. A big one for me was this ferry house place. I went to Tennessee once and stayed in the world's shittiest cabin with my family and had to pull an all-nighter in the place so we could drive back home in the morning because it sucks so bad, and this looked concerningly similar to that. So, you know, some personal baggage helps add to things. The few instances you end up outside are also notable for how they exemplify the crushing dark. A lot of landmarks you see in the distance are only silhouettes, and you won't see enemies running up to you until they're right in your face. Areas can also be pretty tight. The scariest place for me in the whole game are these tunnels you run through near the end that are super compact. You can barely see anything around you. There's something peeking at me from around in the corner and then leaving as soon as I get close, and when I take a picture of a carcass for a pick-me-up, I see whatever the hell that thing is. Definitely a highlight of the entire experience for how things kept going from bad to worse. The only place I think the game kinda falters in is in the strip club. It's a little too lit up and is one of the more colorful places in the game, so it wasn't nearly as imposing as anything else here. This goes back to what I was saying about graphics, because I can't really imagine any of what I just talked about landing the same if the fidelity was higher. There is such a layer of uncertainty, claustrophobia, pressure, dread. I can't imagine that translating if any of the general visual design choices the game makes were altered at all. The way the game presented itself was the scariest part of it by far, to the point that the sections that resonated with me most when my playthrough was over was when I was wandering around, no enemies chasing me, ambient noise that was ambiguous enough for me to not know if it was something I should be worried about. It was so impactful, I was constantly fearing what was around the next corner, even though I knew the worst it could be is another one of our not-so-fantastic 4, which I think speaks to how good it was. Before we close out, let's run through that story real quick. It's mainly told through notes left by the valued employees of this fine establishment. You start in this dungeon where you'll mainly find notes that start hinting towards this place being a cult, coming with a bunch of weird rules. Want to know why all the enemies look the same? That's because apparently each person needs to keep wearing their own assigned uniform, I guess. Imagine being the guy getting stuck with a potato sack and some plaid knowing you could have gotten a welding mask. I'd be pissed. You also can only refer to people in here by their first names, with a new guy getting scolded for using his full name like he's sending a business email. Soon enough, you make the march over to this place branded as the Fairy Castle, being the stomping ground for this guy named Mitch, who everyone hates with a passion. He forgets to turn the camera on when torturing people, and he makes bad poetry. What a bastard. This is one of those cases where some sort of small boss fight against Mitch would have helped diversify the combat a bit. Strangely, this game doesn't have any bosses, or even large special enemies for that matter, which kinda sucks because Mitch is one of the more recognizable characters just from reading his notes. And it would have been neat to at least see him, though I guess considering everyone here needs to conform to one of the 4 uniforms, maybe I beat him up and just didn't know. Around this time, the notes make you aware of a prophecy surrounding the cult involving 2 major figures, the Watcher and the Tooth Sower, with the Watcher being some kind of unstoppable entity that will bring about the end of days, and the Tooth Sower being a random person with the mind of a killer that is destined to set him free. Yeah, from a description like that, I clocked pretty early on that the Tooth Sower is the guy you play as, though it's foreshadowed in a cool way and potentially as early as the first combat encounter you have, because one of the lines the enemies can say when hit is them yelling about their teeth getting dinked. They take this prophecy stuff real serious too. Anyone who questions this story gets immediately killed. It's like a cult or something. Oh. Okay, there's a bit more complexity to it than that. The more you read up, you'll realize this Watcher guy must be really bad news, because it's made the people in here think they're morally justified in torturing people if it means not laying it out. It almost creates this reframing that they don't want to be making the snuff and are doing it solely to satisfy this demon, which can also be inferred a bit by their distaste for Mitch, who seems to be actually having some fun here, and so maybe they kill people who leave the cult because they know too much now. Obviously everything happening here is still really bad, but it definitely adds a new additional layer. This read could also be completely wrong, since this was just my own interpretation, and there's probably something in-game that I'm forgetting that would be able to contradict everything I just said. Also can't really explain away the fucking strip club at the end of the game and everything that contains, so maybe I'm just spouting complete nonsense and need to shut up. The final stretch of the game is where it's at its best. You get some of the most uncomfortable environments in the game, with both the outside and the super dark forest where you can barely see where the enemies are, and the factory that not only keeps the tense atmosphere while shaking up the visuals with the toxic goop and flamethrowers, but also adds to the combat since pits are a much larger and more frequent obstacle than they've been through the whole game, which inherently changes how you approach encounters and refreshed me a little bit. You continually descend deeper into this factory until finding... Is now a good time for me to mention the page just said the Tooth Sower was going to reimburse these guys on their torture as payback for the snuff films. Within the span of one room, the music gets pumped up, hordes of enemies get thrown at you, and now you're running through the halls with your netherite unbreaking 3 pickaxe, decapitating mooks by the hundreds like it's a Doom game. Tooth Fairy's coming to collect, bitch. After politely moving your way through a crowd, you reach your destination, the home of the Watcher. I know that I went through this whole explanation about the information about the cult stuff the game feeds to you up to this point, but seeing them offering bowls of snuff VHSs up to this thing helps it feel way more real and makes for some very striking imagery. We barge into the Watcher's abode without knocking, and after going down this hallway, it rightfully gets mad and forces us out of its house. That is until these two start to get on well. Ah, young love. Man, what a weird little game. I think this is the first time I've talked about a game like this where everything about it is so insanely well done and memorable, except for the gameplay. The gameplay isn't bad by any stretch, but it was certainly the weakest part in how simple and slightly repetitive it stayed throughout pretty much the whole thing. Most games I've talked about here have either had a good story and game mix or were primarily gameplay focused, so Butcher's Creek was nice for being completely different in that department. Its best part is in the experience and everything that comes with it. It also helps that the game is pretty short. It only ran me around 2 hours, probably the perfect length for it. The environment design never loses its luster, and the combat doesn't get too boring before it's all over. For an impulse purchase I checked out on a whim, I was very pleasantly surprised by Butcher's Creek. It made for an insanely memorable time and well worth the price of entry. I've got a good feeling I'll be coming back to Zemansky's horror games like another time. After all, now I gotta figure out what the deal is with those ponies after this thing freaked me out for no reason. But for today, that's where we close out. Thank you for watching, take care, and I will see you all later.